for joining. We will officially start our session today and welcome to our PFF webinar. This is actually the first one of our semester. So very excited to be here with you all today and very excited also for the weekend. I hope you all are ready to get some rest after probably a long weekend. It has been a long weekend for myself. So very excited to have this session with you all. It's a very important topic to us here at PFF and really thinking about how we can support one another and developing very strong and very personal diversity statements. So this session is really just an introduction to your diversity statement. Some of you may already have one. Others of you may just start contemplating kind of the process behind it. So it really is a session that we're hoping to tailor to everyone, no matter where you are in your diversity statement, and just starting to process the value and importance of having a diversity statement, and also how it can be used in different spaces. So many of us are either already in the teaching space or considering going into the teaching space. But diversity statements can actually be used in a lot of different spaces. So I do also want to offer that opportunity for those of you who aren't going the educator route. There is also an opportunity to apply this information in other ways. So that's my short introduction. And if for those of you who don't know me, my name is Liz Vallardo Cardenas. I'm a PFF fellow and also a doctoral student at the School of Community and Global Health. And this session will be co-hosted by Noah Ringler, who's here with me today. We also have a couple other folks from our PFF team, including Jonathan. I think Jonathan's actually, I don't see anyone else. So Jonathan from our team is on, who's also a PFF fellow, and myself and Noah. So if you all have any questions, this is a pretty open session, so we encourage you all to ask questions as I'm presenting. There will also be time for reflections. So if you just joined, I do encourage you to grab a piece of paper or an open Word document, and we'll have some time to reflect on some questions. And Noah, if you don't mind helping me keep an eye on the chat, and feel free to ask away as we talk about this. If you have thoughts or questions or comments, feel free to send them in the chat. And then I'll pause during the session to also ask questions. So with that, let's get started. And I just wanted to offer just a very short disclosure. With diversity statements, we do want to make sure we offer this space as a safe environment for us to share our personal narratives and personal stories. So we do encourage you all to respect and keep this space very safe for everyone. For those of you who want to voice your own experiences and stories, we do want to respect that space. And we also do want to acknowledge that we won't have videos we won't have videos of your names, but the session will be captured, so your voices will be captured, and it is being recorded. So I did want to share that with you all. And so let's get started. So just to start us off, and I welcome anyone to unmute themselves. If you could share with us what you feel a diversity statement is, or if you've done one before, how have you used it? Would anyone like to share some just opening thoughts as far as what is a diversity statement? And if you can also send it in the chat if you prefer. And feel free to unmute yourself. Anyone have any thoughts? I'll let you all think about that for another second. If not, I can give a definition. I see a chat. Yep, Cindy had a good comment, an expression of support for all. It's a great way to see a diversity statement. A diversity statement is really focused around this diversity, inclusion, and equity lens that ensures your understanding of the importance of diversity, of the importance of being an inclusive educator leader. So that's definitely a great way to see it. I did see another comment from Alejandra, inclusion for all. Exactly. So the diversity statement should really capture your own perspectives on how to be inclusive of all, and it could be part of your own experience with diversity, as well as your own positionality when it comes to diversity among your students or among individuals that you work with. Clarissa had a comment. It's a centering mission on how to engage with persons from different experiences. That's a great way to see it, Clarissa. Definitely, it's a very mission-driven statement. So it's really looking at how you engage with individuals from different experiences and really are inclusive of individuals from different backgrounds, from different experiences, different ethnicities, different identities that shape individuals. So that's a great definition. Carrie shared appreciation of what diversity brings to class, school, and society. Another great comment, Carrie. I think the piece that I did want to really highlight there is the fact that it's not only focused on education, it really looks at our societal impact and looking at the systemic impact of diversity. So really looking at how we develop learning that also considers different layers of our environments, right? So it could be our classroom environment, it could be our school systems, it could be our society, and really appreciating the diversity that individuals bring. So great comment. Janice has shared establishing positionality to be aware of others' positionality and moving towards equality. Great comment. And I really appreciate the piece of positionality, because really for a diversity statement, the strongest diversity statements really kind of set their own positions and really kind of make your clear positionality of how you are a diverse and equitable and inclusive educator or leader. So that's another great point. Joy has a question. I have more of a question. It will probably be addressed later. I'm wondering what the difference is between diversity and positionality statements. That's a great question, Joy, and I will cover it a little bit later. And it's actually a very, not very common question, but it is a question that comes up quite a bit as far as the difference between a teaching philosophy and a diversity statement. So teaching philosophy is pretty similar to positionality statement in the sense of what is your own role in teaching, and how do you position yourself as an educator. So there are some nuances between that teaching philosophy statement and the diversity statement that I'll cover later on in our session. So I'll pause there and thank you all for sharing those comments. We'll go back to, I know you all are still sending comments, so I'll come back to those in a bit, but thank you for sharing that. And hopefully as we move along with the session, we'll address any questions that you have. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to now just really quickly outline our agenda. So our agenda, we have, again, it's a pretty general overarching kind of what is a diversity statement. A core element that I want to talk about is exploring the terms that should be in one way or another incorporated in your diversity statement. And these terms are diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these terms, although they are very connected together, they do mean different things. So I wanted to talk through these concepts with you all so you have an understanding of how you could apply them in your own diversity statement. We also want to look at the differences between equality, inequality, equity, and justice. Again, these terms are also very intersected, but they do mean different things. So I wanted to talk about the nuances and differences between those. And then lastly, in thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and thinking about equality, inequality, justice, how can we use these concepts and terms to find ways to teach, model, and practice inclusion for diverse learners? So that's the last piece of this presentation. And the goal in this is to, when you're writing your diversity statement, you want to think about how these concepts apply to you. And then you also want to talk about how you model these concepts and how you practice these concepts in your own teaching, in your own life, in your own leadership. So as I'm sharing these terms and kind of general perspectives, I do encourage you all to pause and think about how this applies to you, because Just like we're writing diversity statements for being inclusive leaders of diverse learners, we also come with our own identities and our own diversity of experience. So these terms may mean something very different to you than they do to me. So I hope that this connects to your own experiences and to your own perspectives of kind of how you see diversity important and valuable in your own life. So let's move on to the first kind of piece of this. And this might not be completely new information to you, but I did want to just highlight how we use diversity statements, and they're most commonly used in the world of academia. So you'll see them in graduate admission applications. You'll often see them in fellowships, in postdoctoral positions, and in faculty positions, and promotion and tenure. But they're also increasingly coming up in non-faculty spaces, especially during this time that we're so focused around equity. We are seeing the need for thinking through our own experiences and our own ways that we support diversity, inclusion, and equity. So they are actually now being asked for from employers and from organizations that do not represent the academic or faculty realm. So for those of you who are exploring that, it may be helpful to have one for that reason as well. And some key elements to think about for your diversity statement. So this is kind of some of the aspects that you should be covering in your diversity statement. Every diversity statement should be very unique to you. So you may not cover everything exactly as it is outlined here, but some ways that you want to think about your diversity statement is you want to address how diversity has affected your own learning and your own development. So we all represent diversity, and just within this Zoom meeting, we're a diverse group of individuals, and we've kind of come with our own of development, our own experiences. So you want to talk about how diversity has impacted yourself and in your own learning and development. And this is especially important when it comes to teaching, because our own experiences as educators in education have impacted the way we want to teach, right? So it might have been either a positive or a negative experience, but it really does shape the way that we have developed our own positionality when it comes to supporting diversity. The next piece you want to think about is how do you interact with people and institutions? This is important, especially when you think about diversity and inclusion and ensuring that you have some understanding of how to support diversity and inclusion and equity in your own interaction with individuals. And then you can also think about it in other learning through others' learning and development. So do you support diversity, inclusion, and equity when you teach, when you do your own research, when you do your own service or leadership? What are some concrete ways that you're supporting it within your own spaces? So those are the three core bucket areas that I recommend you include in one way or another in your diversity statement. But again, it really depends on your experiences and what you want to really highlight for yourself. And I wanted to just quickly talk about why a diversity statement is important. So number one, and you all shared quite a bit of this information already. So a lot of it now is repetition, but number one, it presents your position and approach to promoting inclusive and equitable learning. It also can demonstrate your awareness of current issues when it comes to diversity and being inclusive in higher education. And it can also describe past, present, or future engagement opportunities that support diversity, inclusion, and equity. And this can include a variety of different spaces. So if you're in the area of research, if you're in the area of teaching or service, what are your own experiences that you've had, or what are some current engagement ways that you're supporting diversity within your own disciplines? So this is why it's important. And I wanted to just highlight one statement, and I think there's actually there's actually a more updated one that I don't have available right now, but it kind of covers the same information. So this is from the Board of Regents of the University of California, Statement on Diversity, and they describe it as a variety of personal experiences, values, worldviews that arise from differences of culture, circumstance, such as differences in race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, language, abilities, disabilities, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and geographic region, and more, right? So diversity is a very broad term, but we do want to be inclusive of all the different ways that that experience and identity is represented. So this one captures quite a bit of the different ways that individuals can be diverse and represent diverse identities. Then now I want to start thinking about exploring DEI. So I've talked a little bit about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and these are the themes that are most important to think about when you're shaping out your diversity statement. And the reason why it's important is because when you enhance DEI, you also help, especially in education, you help focus on our overarching goal in education, which is to improve student learning outcomes. So when you bring in a very clear DEI perspective, you're also really supporting directly and indirectly ways for student learning outcomes to improve. So that is one of the core reasons as to why it's important to think about in your diversity statement, and especially as an educator, why it's important to think about for your students and your student learning outcomes. So now I want to walk through each of these terms individually, and I'll try to go a little slower so we can think through these terms, because I think this is one of the meatiest pieces of our conversation, is to think through each of these elements and to think about how these apply to you and how you would like to integrate this information in your own diversity statement. And I did kind of want to explain the nuances between these terms, very high level. For diversity, it's a descriptive word. So usually when we talk about diversity, we're describing different identities, different experiences, different ways that individuals are represented. So it's usually used as a descriptive term. Inclusion is an action-oriented word, meaning there's some sort of action that you're taking to be an inclusive educator, leader, scholar. So there's potentially like a specific teaching method that you're using to ensure that you're being inclusive of the diversity of learners in your classroom, or there's a specific behavior that you're using that supports inclusion of individuals. So there's some sort of action that you're taking to be inclusive. Equity is an outcomes word, meaning that as a result of a specific action that you're taking, you're supporting equity. There's a little bit of a nuance there. Some of us will use equity and inclusion interchangeably, but you do want to think about how they're different, in the sense that equity, you want to think about the fact that it's an outcome as a result of something that was done to support an equitable space for an individual. So it is linked to inclusion because by being inclusive, we are supporting equity, but the result of equity doesn't necessarily, it doesn't occur without some action taking place, right? So in order to support equity, we do need to think about what practices we're using to advance that. And I'm seeing a couple comments. So let's just go to them. Isn't equity, so Cindy asked the question, isn't equity about access to power and compensation? That is a good point, Cindy, and it is definitely linked to that. So by equity, we want to consider, and actually I think there's an image that I wanted to share with you all. See if we can go to that one. Oh, you know, I actually don't have it. But yes, I guess going back to the question, Cindy, it is about access to power. So basically, we want to recognize that not all individuals come with the same level of power and power dynamics. So understanding understanding that level of power and ensuring that the level of power is distributed across all individuals, and that individuals have equal access to learning is one way to support equity. And also in terms of compensation, power and compensation are connected. So individuals that have more compensation usually have more power, right? So we want to find ways to support equity in that lens and ensuring that there's distribution of resources and distribution of income across individuals and communities to support equity. So let's see. Lots of great questions. I'm happy to see all of the chats. I don't know if I'm keeping up with all of them. So hopefully we can go back to some of these. Let me cover a couple more and then we'll come back. So Janice, isn't equity the goal of recognizing diversity being included result? Oh, actually, sorry, I don't think I'm reading that one right. Isn't equity the goal of recognizing diversity? Yes. And being included resulting in equity? Yes. So it's you're right on point, Janice. So it's the goal of equity is to recognize that there's a diversity that's represented in identities and individuals. And in order to result in equity, we do have to recognize ways to include individuals. It definitely is right on target as far as understanding that. The only piece I would add to that is in order to achieve equity, inclusiveness is one action, but there are others as far as looking at ways to support equity. Like the example that was shared earlier about distribution of power, that could be another way to support equity. So there's different actions that you could take to support equity. Charles asked the question, how is equity measured at which point and on basis of what? Oh, that's a good question, Charles. I don't think I have a specific answer to that. I think it really depends on exactly what you're looking at. There's different ways to measure equity. Let me get back to that question because I think that question might take up a little longer. So maybe if you want to stick around after the meeting, we can further discuss that, but it is a good question. So if you all don't mind, I'm gonna, just to be mindful of time, I'm gonna go through our slides and keep asking questions. If I don't get to them during the presentation, we'll try to come back to them at the end. But the next piece I wanted to talk about is diversity, and as we shared, it's a descriptive term, so it represents the multiple facets that make up identity and that make up perspectives, and it also is really important to think about from a systemic lens and understanding specifically how we may be biased to different types of diversity. And this can be called implicit or unconscious bias. So individuals who represent different diversity, diverse identities, they may experience oppression, marginalization, exclusion from full access to opportunities. So it's really important to be mindful of that when thinking about diverse individuals and ensuring that we are thinking about our implicit and unconscious bias of diverse people and ensuring that we are doing the opposite of oppression or marginalization and really focusing on our efforts around inclusion. So that's what I wanted to talk about for that element. And the most common areas that that can be marginalized or not included and really need that support when it comes to inclusion is looking at these dimensions of racial and ethnic bias, gender bias, religious intolerance, other areas of ageism, sexism, heterosexism, and ableism. So these are all different ways that that counteract the value and importance of diversity, and it's really important as educators and leaders and scholars that we support ways to counteract that and ensure that we have inclusive practices and inclusive behaviors that support this diversity and representation. So I wanted to pause here and ask you all to do a 1-minute reflection. So if you want to grab a piece of paper or type out some notes for yourself. And if you want to answer one of these questions, or if you want to answer both, the first one is thinking about any areas that you may be unaware of, or that are you aware of, or do you address any biases or blindness areas in your own teaching, discipline, or research when it comes to understanding diversity? The other question you can think about is, how do you support diversity? So this is for those of you who are already teaching. How do you support diversity in your own classroom, or also even beyond the classroom among your faculty, colleagues, or in the community? I'll give you all a minute to think about that, and if you want to chime that in the chat box, or just keep it to yourself and write it as a part of a journal. So if you want to take that time to write that piece, and then I'll keep an eye on time so we can move on for the next slide in about a minute. All right, I'll bring us back, and I'm reading through the comments. I was trying to be a little quiet so you all could think. Thank you for sharing these comments, and I won't read them in detail. There was a question at the very end. I think that was shared if the chat was going to be saved or offered to us. And I actually don't know the answer to. Jonathan, do you happen to have the answer to that? I know we only offer the recording, but I'm not sure if there's a transcription that's also available. I think we keep that, right?
If the you should see a closed captioning button, and if you turn that on, you can turn on transcription for yourself and save it at the end.
Okay.
You should be able to click on the kebab, the three little dots, I call it kebab, and then save the chat at the end, at the bottom of the chat window.
Gotcha. It seems like it's not visible.
Okay, then what that means then is the settings on the actual account didn't allow it for this specific webinar, or maybe we need to ask Shelby if we want that on or not. But what we can do is we'll check with Shelby, and if she's okay with it, then we can add the chat to the files on the Google Drive.
Okay.
But we have to check at the privacy. There might be a privacy thing with that.
Yeah, it's actually what I'm a little worried about. I don't know if we actually can share them for privacy. So that might be why they were not disabled. But I'll check back on that, and thank you for asking that question. And I'll also just to be mindful of time, I did want to just quickly kind of highlight some of the themes that I'm seeing, and I think one of the challenges that comes with diversity is it's really difficult to ensure that you're doing the right thing at all times, right? So I think that's part of part of the area that is important to think about when it comes to diversity statement is the intention of supporting individuals and having this open mind to of acceptance, of tolerance, and of also of just of constant vigilance and constant awareness, because we're not perfect human beings. We don't live in a perfect system, and we're bound to make mistakes. But the most important piece is to recognize that, to be vigilant of that, and to change that whenever we realize we've made a mistake. So I did want to acknowledge that there's no perfect way to support diversity at all times, and as human beings, we may make a mistake. But the most important piece here today is to really think about some concrete strategies that demonstrate your own awareness, and your own understanding and your own intention of ensuring that you're supporting diversity, inclusion, and equity to the highest level that you can, and being a constant learner in this space. So I'll leave you all with that, and thank you for sharing that, and continue to send more chats in the comment if you would like. I wanted to make sure we cover all three topics. So the next one I wanted to cover is inclusion. And inclusion, as I shared earlier, is really focused around actions. So these actions are really intended to remove any barriers that we have to access and to success. And they can include different ways that we practice, that we recognize, that we embrace and engage students in education, and in the plurality that comes with diversity of mind. And really modeling and emulating attitudes that support openness, curiosity, and respect for individuals. That all really is a very important way to support inclusion. And they can also be translated as specific actions depending on what you're teaching, and the different pedagogy that you use that is inclusive to learners. And one way that I do encourage you all to think about inclusion, and one tool that's very useful if you're not aware of it, is UDL. So for those of you who are going into teaching and are looking at pedagogy and designing practices that support learning environments for all students, UDL has a lot of great ways to support that. I don't know. I think we had a session last semester, and I don't know if we have one this semester, but we have covered UDL in more detail in other sessions. So you're welcome to reach out to us if you would like to learn more about UDL, or we can also host a presentation on this. But I won't go into detail. I do encourage you all to click that link and explore the website and explore the tool if you haven't already. But it's a good tool to use to support inclusion in learning. And this is what it looks like. The focus behind it is really looking at different multiple means of supporting student representation, student expression, and student engagement, and finding ways to support the variety of ways that students can learn. So there's a really useful website that kind of navigates you through different ways that you could do it. So this is a really great tool that I wanted to highlight for everyone. So I'll pause here, and this one we'll do this one a little faster. This one I just wanted to give folks a couple minutes to think about what is your experience, and how has it informed your approach to inclusivity. So think about your own. It could be most recently during kind of your teaching. It could be in your past in developing as a student. Or as an educator, what has been your own experience, and how has it informed your approach to inclusivity? And I'll give you all a minute to think about that, and then we can move on to our next slide. All right, we will reconvene. And thank you all for thinking about that and sharing some comments in the chat. Feel free to continue adding those. I wanted to kind of cover some of these aspects of equity, which is the last term that we want to think through. And equity is important, as we've talked about, because it results in removing barriers and looking at inclusive practices that create opportunities for individuals from diverse ranges, from diverse spaces, and really finding ways to ensure that there's a distribution of support that supports all individuals. And it for equity, one important aspect I wanted to recognize is that it does recognize systemic barriers and ensuring that we actively engage in ways to support access to engagement for success of all individuals, and acknowledging that there have been barriers within our systems that prevent students from succeeding. And recognizing these systemic barriers is one thing, and also actively engaging and changing them is the true way to support equity, and to ensure that there's changes in the ways that students can access and receive education or different opportunities to learn. So that's one piece that I wanted to think through with you all, and really acknowledging that with equity, it's really focused around identifying and addressing inequality, and with justice, it's really looking at our system and understanding what are some aspects that are in our system that are not offering equal access to opportunity. So both equity and justice are connected, but the big nuance between them is that the justice is really, with justice, it's really focused around fixing points in our system that are not offering equal access to individuals, versus equity, it's really looking at ways to address it, and really taking actionable ways to support it, but not really so much focused on looking at our system and the systemic pieces that impact our system. So I wanted to offer another 1-minute reflection to kind of further process this information and think about, in what ways have you engaged in diversity, equity, inclusion on issues that are important to you. So there's many issues that have surfaced, especially this year during kind of our pandemic, and now hopefully moving finally out of this. We have seen more inequities in our educational systems, in our healthcare systems, and it has really surfaced some aspects within our systems that are not offering ways for all individuals to access and receive the same resources, the same information. So in thinking about these issues and understanding these issues, I wanted to offer the opportunity for you all to think about the different ways that you have engaged in diversity, equity, inclusion within your own time. It could be this year, it could have been in the past, but if you wanted to jot down some ways that you feel you've engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion on issues that are important to you. All right, I think we will come back. So I hope you all had a couple seconds to think about that. Feel free to continue thinking about it as I continue to share this presentation. And I did want to highlight some good comments that I'm seeing in the chat. Our last comment here included all style that there's been included all styles of learn. So looking at ethnic and cultural groups and learning and using texts that include students' culture. It's a really great example. So really looking at our own curriculum and ensuring that the curriculum that's represented includes individuals from diverse backgrounds. The next individual, Cindy, joined a group to support Black female entrepreneurs and an equity group in my community. That's great. It's great to also think about, and this is a good example of spaces that are outside of our school system. So looking at our communities and other ways that we can engage outside of the classroom is good to think about and can be included in your diversity statement. Thank you for sharing that. It seems like there's a lot of connections as far as how these relate to you all and seeing kind of some of these other comments. So thank you for sharing that in the chat, and hopefully you're able to jot down some of this information for yourself, because the goal will be for you to walk away with some thoughts as you're developing your own diversity statement. But with that, I'll move on to the last section, which is thinking about your diversity statement and understanding it in the context of eliminating any structural inequities that we see within our systems, and also thinking about a social justice perspective, right? So we had a really good comment earlier about distribution of power and understanding that there is a need to think about social justice and ensuring that our society is receiving justice and fair ways to learn, fair access to learning resources. So how can we take our own positionality in supporting the different ways to support our society and the different individuals that represent our society? So looking at it from a social justice perspective is important to think about, and looking at the structural inequities that we understand. And when I say we, it's each of you may see different ones. So speaking to those within your diversity statement is important to think about and important to incorporate. And these can include different types of social justice issues, including racial oppression, ableism, homophobia, sexism. You don't have to talk about all of them. And I think that's the challenge with the diversity statement, because we all come with our own experiences and perspectives. So the important piece is to really highlight your own experience and what you most closely support and identify with. And really still looking at it broadly from the perspective of diversity, but focusing in on specific areas and issues that are important to you is a good way to focus in your diversity statement and make it very unique to you. So that's one aspect that or one advice that I could share with you all. And then the other piece to think about is focus on issues and opportunities and pedagogies that support diversity and identity, and also different social status for individuals. So look at the opportunities that you see within your own practice and the different pedagogy methods and resources and tools that you would like to use within your own classroom or within your own space. And with that, that concludes our session today. We have a couple minutes to wrap up, about 15 actually. So we have some time for questions at the end. Before we go to questions, I did want to encourage you all to make an appointment with us. So myself, Jonathan, Noah, and others from our team would be very happy to meet with you all and answer any questions, any kind of continuing thoughts that you would like to process with us as you think about your diversity statement and any questions that you have about diversity, inclusion, and equity. You're welcome to make an appointment with us. It's very simple to do. You just click on that link and it'll allow you to kind of pick who you would like to meet with, whoever's available to meet your schedule. So I do encourage you all to make an appointment with us. I did want to launch a quick poll. So if I can, actually, Jonathan, if you don't mind, if you could launch that for me, since I can't do it on my end for some reason. If you can launch that poll, and if you all could just take the poll, it really helps us think through this, how helpful this session was to you, and also plan ahead for future sessions. If you don't mind taking that.
All right, poll should be launched.
And I'm not seeing it on my end, Jonathan, but it might just be my computer. Is everyone else seeing it? Yeah,
Yes.
okay, awesome. All right. Is the poll complete, Jonathan?
$13 out of 21 so far.
Okay. I'll give you all another minute or so to complete that, and then we can move on. And I think some folks are needing to jump off. So for those of you who are jumping off, thank you for joining today's session. I hope it was helpful for you all, and feel free to reach out to us if you have further thoughts or questions that you would like to talk about. We're happy to meet with you, and thank you for joining today's session. If you want to stick around for a little bit, I am happy to stick around for anyone who has questions. And I think with that, we'll also close our poll, Jonathan, if you don't mind closing it. So let me just go through our last slides. I did also want to just share a couple other updates that might be helpful for folks. We do have a good LinkedIn community page, really awesome. It's been growing quite a bit recently, and it's a page that we use to highlight key events that are happening both in PFF and externally, and also an opportunity to network and post questions and resources with other individuals that share this space with us. So I do encourage you all to join if you do have a LinkedIn page. I also wanted to highlight our next two upcoming webinars. So NOAA's webinar is coming up next week, focused around enhancing the student, oops, just moved it, went away. Enhancing student experience, goodness, I think I'm trying to shift this. Enhancing the student experience in online courses, and that will be next Wednesday, June 9th from 12 to 1. So welcome you all to take a look. All of these events are posted on our website, so feel free to read the description of the sessions at your own leisure. And then the next one, also by NOAA, is coming up on the 17th, and this one's focused around student learning outcomes. So encourage you all to attend those next two events. And just some kind of key last minute follow-ups. We will email out those slides to you all. Jonathan also shared the link to the slides on our chat box, so feel free to open that up and take a look at the slides. You can visit our website, feel free to email us, and then we offer different services, including consultation time, webinars, resources, and other resources, including our teaching certificate. And you can find us in a lot of different platforms, social media. We have our website. We actually have a really cool blog now that we are using to highlight different individuals that are already in the teaching field and kind of sharing and spotlighting their stories, and also different resources that might be useful to you. So if you want to check out our blog, it'll be found on our website. And these are all just additional resources that you might want to take a look at. They include different ways to think about equity, diversity, and inclusion in higher education, and also have a lot of good examples on how to approach your diversity statement. So I do encourage you to think about those a bit and exploring which ones are helpful for you. And with that, I'll leave it open for questions. I did see a couple of questions in the chat, so maybe we can start with those. And let's try to tackle these, because I think I did see several questions. So I'm going to try to not skip any. Let's go back. So I'm going to just work my way up. Let's see. So Janice, you asked a question about if you have internal strengths, you can address external power structures better. Janice, are you still online? I would love to answer this question. I'm not sure the full context behind it, and I don't see her on. I believe she was referring, and it's a good question, or it's a good statement. I think it's referring to individuals and being change agents when it comes to understanding the systemic issues that we have within our systems, and understanding our own power and changing them, and looking at the external factors that influence individuals. So I believe that was the context that she was presenting that statement, but don't want to speak to her statement too much since she's not here, but it was a good statement. Let's see, other questions. Noah, did you flag any that you want me to address?
Mostly a back and forth between a few people.
Okay.
There was one. Would you suggest including our personal diversity statements on our syllabus?
Oh, that is a good question. So there is, you don't have to include the full diversity statement. We do encourage you to have your diversity statement public. But the best place to have like a public diversity statement would be through your through like an online platform such as your teaching website. So that's a really great place to show others, including your students, including colleagues and others that want to learn about your own diversity perspectives and statements and ways that you support diversity. You can include that in your Teacher Scholar website. For your syllabus, you don't have to include the full statement in a syllabus because then it distracts students from the class material. I'm sorry, the full scope of the syllabus. But you can include a smaller clause, like a shorter highlight of how you support diversity, and have a shorter diversity statement clause. I would be happy to talk further about that. And we do have a couple examples of what those look like that I don't have in my slides specifically. So if for the individual who posed that question, I'm happy to talk about that further in an appointment. But do encourage you to include that within your syllabus. And even as a policy, it's important to think about including your own statement on why diversity is important in your classroom for your students to understand what policies do you support, and ensuring that students' experiences and identities are included within that space and welcome safe environments. But a full diversity statement within a syllabus might be too long to include. Let's see. Any other questions that I missed?
Could I jump on and ask a quick question?
Yes, of course.
It's Joy. I don't have my camera on. Apologies. Just thinking about, I'm currently a teacher at a community college, and when I finish my master's program, I probably will be applying for full-time teaching. And thinking about the difference, I was asking earlier about like the difference between a positionality statement, a diversity statement, and the teaching philosophy. I was wondering if specific schools ask for, one school might ask for a diversity statement, one school might ask for a teaching philosophy, or is there a standard? And then a little bit more about the differences between them. So if one school asks for a positionality statement and the other school asks for a teaching philosophy, kind of what are the different ways that I would want to tailor each statement to be specific?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joy. And to answer your first question about if there's a standard, there really isn't a specific standard.
Okay.
I think every school asks for, even when it comes to the page limit, like some schools only want like a 1-page diversity statement or a teaching philosophy statement that includes a kind of an aspect of your diversity statement. So each one is a little different. What we encourage is to have a template that can be customized based on the needs of the school. And it's the way it's easiest to customize it is to have them separate. So you would have one that's more focused around your diversity statement and one that's more focused around your teaching philosophy. The main difference behind them is your diversity statement is really focused around this DEI perspective and how you support DEI through the way you model your teaching, through the way that you develop your classroom spaces. So it's really focused around DEI. Your teaching philosophy statement is a little broader. So you're not only looking at DEI, you're also just thinking more broadly. What is your teaching approach? How do you, why do you teach the way you do? What is your own philosophy for teaching? And there is definitely an overlap. So you'll find yourself still, for an individual who supports diversity, inclusion, and equity, it's impossible not to include it in your teaching philosophy statement. It's going to come out naturally.
I
But
see.
but the emphasis is not specifically on DEI. It's more broader
Okay.
to anything else that you want to talk about that shapes your own discipline and your own philosophy for teaching.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
No problem. Glad that helped. Let's see. I see another question from Michelle. We have all been socialized into a white dominant culture. Many of us believe that's what we have been taught. It's a great point, Michelle, and it's something that I didn't have an opportunity to talk through too much in this presentation, but is important to think about when it comes to understanding our classroom design, thinking about how we can decolonize our syllabus and ensuring that we have a way to represent all cultures and not only the white dominant culture that has been very deeply ingrained in a lot of our teaching practices. So really recognizing that and understanding how we can diversify the way that we also teach. And that includes by looking at our curriculum and ensuring that there's a representation of different scholarly work, different ways that learners can identify with the material that they're reading. And also thinking about how we're supporting our students. So students that represent different students of color, of different ethnicities, of different backgrounds and identities. How can we ensure that that they are included and supported in their learning, and for those who have experienced any form of oppression of racism, how can we ensure that we have a safe environment so students are supported and do not have that as a barrier to their own learning or to their own growth. So thank you for acknowledging that. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? These are all great. I'm hoping I didn't miss any. I'm also trying to keep tabs of the new ones, but I'm going to quickly scan back to the older ones because I want to say I probably missed some. I know Noah was responding to folks as well, so we might have them all covered. If there's any that I didn't cover and you all are still online, you're welcome to either resend it in the chat or you can also unmute yourself, and I'm happy to try to take a stab at answering it. Does anyone have any open questions that I have not answered?
I've got another one if no one else is chiming in.
Yeah, of course.
So
ahead,
this is kind of a big open one too, probably worth a much larger discussion, but I am a white cis woman, and sometimes when I see different diversity statements or things like that, like I think there's a danger of them feeling very performative and kind of hollow. And when I try to write them, it seems like the advice is like make statements, not saying stuff like I try to or work on or attempt to. And I'm wondering, I guess if you could address, the difference between a performative statement and a statement that's just sort of saying I do these things, and how to really incorporate that into your teaching, or make sure that it is not simply performative and that it really is.
That's a great, I appreciate the question, Joy, and it's a really good question. And I'm wondering if Jonathan or Noah wouldn't mind sharing the link to our diversity statement handbook.
Great.
We have a full handbook, and I don't think I'll have a chance to cover it during our session, but I would encourage you to look at, there's a specific section in our handbook where we think through ways to share or communicate the information that you want to share in your diversity statement, so that you're not only making a statement, you're really acting and connecting it to your own way that you teach and the way that you represent that information. So when we walk through our diversity statements, one of the challenges that we see and that we all face in writing these is that we tend to just write the statements that we believe in. But you then have to really think about how you can flesh that out and connect it to your own experience and connect it to what specifically you do in the classroom. And there's a whole process. I'm forgetting the name of it. And Noah or Jonathan, do you remember what it's called? it's described in our handbook. If it doesn't come to mind, it's okay. I can, I'm happy to set up an appointment with you, Joy, if you would like. If not, there is a full handbook that talks about a way to ensure that the way that you're conveying that information is not, that's not just just focused around the statement piece. It's really focused on how it's applied to you.
Okay. Yeah, the handbook's not something I've seen. If that link gets put up, that would be great. And that would be, I think, really helpful to read. I'm also in the PFF teaching certificate class with Chamonix right now. So
great.
We're still working on a lot of this stuff too, just trying to, get all the information from all the available sources.
Yeah, so that you're in a great place. So you'll, once you, I think once you've moved along in the class a little bit further, you'll have that opportunity to really think through how you could focus your own diversity statement to ensure that it captures what you want to include. And I'm sure at some point we'll probably also, I think Tamara is on. I don't know, Tamara, if you have any other comments since you're co-teaching that class with Chamonix, but I believe at some point in the class, you all will kind of talk through your diversity statements, and you can refer to that handbook as well.
Yeah. I'm probably Chamonix will share that handbook too. I just haven't heard of that yet. It sounds really great.
Yeah. And I think it's a great question. And I'm not the judge of these diversity statements in a school setting, so I can't speak to what is typically looked at. But just going through life, you can feel when something's performative, and I know I would be very turned off by that. So finding your connection to the material, I think generally it shows whether it's performative or not. So if you use authentic wording about like, this has been my process, this is where I was, here's where I'm at, and this is how I'm trying to get better in that. I think that is always, just as a general principle, a better way to go about things. But I know there is some temptation to say, I am, I'm at this point, I've always been at this point. But in general, I think it shines through it doesn't exactly work. So, but it is a great question. Absolutely. I think that's something we all struggle with.
I would like to add something as well. When it comes to writing your diversity statement, don't be afraid to get personal with it. If you have a personal story of your background, when you were going through college, or a point that made you realize the importance of it, feel free to share a personal story. And if there's some things you feel like you're not fully competent in certain groups, don't feel like, nobody has to be familiar with the struggles of our backgrounds of all students, but you can write about how you're going to address that inclusivity in your classroom. For instance, knowing the centers, knowing the campus very well where you're writing your diversity statement to, and showing how you're going to be a resource person in your class for those different kinds of students.
I wanted to chime in, and I agree with Jonathan, and what Jonathan just said made me realize that I think there's a larger mission here to maybe not perform that we are, these ethical, diversity-minded individuals, and it's a concrete endpoint. Like, I am this and that's it. There's no conversation. So what Noah and Liz were pointing to is that reflective process of knowing what areas to keep working on, being able to express that in your diversity statement, as Jonathan is pointing to, so that you present yourself as an evolving, or as a being, as it's an active, it's a verb, rather than, yes, I understand DEI, and there's no discussion anymore. That may, of course, reveal in the hiring process where different institutions may be in a different spot or have a different position about that. And that's something to discuss, I think, at a much later, at a different time, or maybe in one of these events where, we're hoping to present something that's evolving and that's growing and expansive. And then at the same time, education itself and higher ed specifically, it may be evolving in a different way or at a different rate or not, there's so much more to it, right? I'm gonna stop talking now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I think that was Joy.
No, just agreeing, saying thank you. That's great.
And then my last 2 cents here on that is try to remember also that your hiring committees, your search committee, they're trying to get a sense of who you are as a person. So it sounds like you already know this, Joy, but it doesn't help to say it out loud. We're not trying to have the right answers when we're writing teaching philosophy statements and diversity statements. We're trying to give the committee a sense of who we are so they know if we're a good fit for their institution or not. And vice versa. Is their institution a good fit for us?
Yeah, that's a helpful point too.
Well, thank you, Joy, for that question, and for my fellow peers for giving all those great insights and responses to that question. I think it's really important to think about, and just to echo kind of Tamar's element of reflection, I think that's one aspect that I did want to kind of leave everyone with is with our diversity statements. It's really important to look at this as like an evolving process. Every day we're learning. Every day we're learning new ways to be inclusive, to support equity in different ways. So the diversity statement is also just a tool to track our progress in those areas and needs constant updates, right? So you might have one diversity statement one year, next year you might have new issues that you're really passionate about, or new ways that you're supporting diversity in your classroom that have been really effective. So it's always good to have that tool as a resource for you to also think about your own transformation as an educator, your own transformation as an individual, and to think about, how can you improve based on what you have now? What are new ways that I can support say diversity, inclusion, and equity? So it is definitely a transformative and ever-evolving process. So I did want to acknowledge that last piece. I do also want to recognize that we're about 10 minutes over time now. So I did want to let you all get on with the rest of your Friday and hopefully early weekend. So I want to thank you all for joining the session. Thank you to my team for also being here today, and to everyone who was here. I hope this was beneficial for everyone, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And with that, I'll close today's session. Thank you all for joining.